High Evaluator Zexton adjusted her observation screens and frowned at what she saw. The small blue planet below had been added to her assessment list 3 cycles ago, and she still couldn't understand why the Galactic Concordat bothered with such primitive worlds. Her job was to evaluate military capabilities of newly discovered species, and this one called themselves humans. She watched their largest military exercises with growing disappointment. Their weapons were crude projectile launchers that required physical ammunition. Their largest explosives were barely sufficient to crack a mountain, let alone threaten a proper warship. Their soldiers wore fabric uniforms and carried equipment that looked heavy and uncomfortable. Compared to the Korthax energy shields or the Vendari plasma cannons, humanity's military technology was laughable. "Begin tactical assessment," Zexton commanded her assistant. A young analyst named Prelix, who had just graduated from the Concordat Military Academy. Prelix pulled up the data stream showing various human conflicts. They have approximately 200 separate nations, each with their own military forces. Total armed personnel across the planet number around 60 million. They possess approximately 13,000 nuclear weapons, though most are in storage. Nuclear weapons? Zexton's crest flattened in disbelief. They still use atomic fission. That technology is 5,000 years outdated. Yes, High Evaluator. It appears to be their most advanced destructive capability. Zexton made a note in her report. Category 7 at best, possibly Category 8. The Concordat ranking system placed species into 10 categories based on military threat level. Category 1 species could threaten entire star systems. Category 10 species barely understood metalworking. Humans would rank near the bottom. What bothered Zexton most wasn't just the primitive technology. It was how humans fought. She watched recordings of their recent conflicts and saw soldiers hesitating before entering buildings, checking if civilians were present. She saw supply lines dedicated to feeding prisoners of war. She saw field hospitals treating enemy wounded alongside their own. "They have rules," Prelix said, pulling up a document. "The Geneva Conventions. They limit what soldiers can do during war. No attacks on hospitals, no torture of prisoners, no targeting of civilians." Zexton's mandibles clicked in confusion. They handicapped themselves voluntarily? During war? It appears so, High Evaluator. She watched more footage. Human generals studied ancient books, some thousands of years old, filled with strategies and philosophies about war. They had academies dedicated entirely to studying past conflicts. They even had museums preserving old weapons and uniforms like sacred relics. "They're obsessed with their own history," Zexton muttered. "They keep looking backward instead of forward." Prelix highlighted another peculiarity. High Evaluator. They also have something called military honor. Soldiers receive medals for showing mercy to enemies, or for sacrificing themselves to save others. They value concepts like courage, sacrifice, and duty above simple victory. "Inefficient," Zexton declared. "The Korthax simply overwhelm with numbers. The Vendari strike with maximum force from orbit. The Trellic destroy entire planets that resist. These humans waste resources on philosophy and sentiment." She compiled her report over the next several hours. Earth would be classified as Category 7, minimal tactical threat. The planet possessed some industrial capacity and nuclear weapons, but their military doctrine was hopelessly compromised by outdated concepts of honor and restraint. Their technology lagged behind the Concordat standard by at least 3,000 years. Their disunited political structure meant they could never mount a coordinated defense against a serious threat. "Recommend minimal protection tier," Zexton dictated. "Resource value, moderate. Conquest difficulty, low. This species poses no significant military threat to Concordat members or allies. The report was filed, encrypted, and transmitted to the Concordat's central archive. It should have remained there, accessible only to Concordat members in good standing. But the Concordat had enemies, and enemies had spies. 3 weeks later, the report appeared on the black market information exchanges that existed in the dark spaces between star systems. Within days, it had been purchased by 17 different parties. One of those parties was the Huruk Empire. The Huruk were not members of the Concordat. They were raiders and conquerors who had built their empire by attacking weak species and absorbing their territories. They were always looking for easy targets. Planets rich in resources but poor in defenses. War leader Krianak read the assessment report with growing excitement. Earth and water, minerals, and a large population that could be put to work. Better yet, the natives were classified as Category 7 with outdated technology and foolish restraint in warfare. His battle claws flexed as he imagined the easy conquest. "Prepare the 7th Conquest Fleet," he ordered his subordinates. "We depart in 5 cycles." The Huruk had conquered 43 worlds using the same basic strategy. Arrive with overwhelming force, destroy any resistance from orbit, land ground forces to occupy major cities, and crush any remaining opposition. Most species surrendered after the first orbital bombardment. Those who didn't were eliminated. Krianak reviewed his fleet composition. 30 warships, each capable of glassing a continent. 10 transport vessels carrying 60,000 Huruk warriors. Support ships for supplies and equipment. More than enough to handle a Category 7 species. He studied the tactical data on human weapons and armor. Primitive. They're fastest. Aircraft couldn't even escape a planet's atmosphere on their own. Their naval vessels floated on water like toys. Their soldiers were soft-skinned and vulnerable. "This will be over in days," Krianak told his officers. "Perhaps even hours. The humans will learn what happens to weak species in this galaxy." Back on Earth, nobody knew the Huruk were coming. Humanity continued its daily existence, unaware that they had been evaluated, categorized, and marked for conquest. In military academies around the world, officers studied the campaigns of Alexander and Caesar. In museums, ancient weapons rested behind glass. In libraries, books on strategy and tactics gathered dust. Zexton filed her report and moved on to evaluating the next species on her list. She never gave humanity another thought. Why would she? They were just another weak species in a galaxy full of predators. She had no idea that humanity's weakness was about to become the galaxy's greatest lesson. Asterisk. The Huruk's 7th conquest. Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. War leader Krianak stood on his command deck, watching the small blue planet appear on his screens. Everything was proceeding according to plan. "Deploy standard conquest formation," he ordered. All ships advanced to orbital bombardment range. What Krianak didn't know was that humanity had detected his fleet the moment it arrived. Earth's deep space monitoring network, originally built to watch for asteroids, had picked up the massive energy signatures. Within minutes, emergency protocols activated across the planet. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the United Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the alien ships approach. Around her, representatives from every nation's military gathered in the command center. This was humanity's first contact with alien life, and it was happening exactly as the pessimists had predicted. "How long until they reach weapons range?" she asked. 6 hours, her tactical officer replied. Their formation suggests they plan orbital bombardment before landing ground forces. Chun nodded. She had spent 30 years studying military history and strategy. She knew what happened when a technologically superior force attacked a weaker one. The Mongols versus medieval Europe. The Spanish versus the Aztecs. Colonial powers versus indigenous peoples. The pattern was always the same. unless the weaker force was smarter. "Deploy the fleet," she ordered. Formation Echo 7. Around Earth, ships began launching from hidden facilities. Humanity had been building a space defense force for 20 years, ever since the Concordat made first contact and humans realized they weren't alone. The ships were small compared to the Haruk vessels, and their weapons were primitive by galactic standards. But they moved with purpose. Krianak watched the human ships take position and felt amusement ripple through his battle claws. The humans were arranging themselves in a standard defensive formation, except they had made a critical mistake. Their flanks were exposed. Their strongest ships were in the center, leaving the sides vulnerable. "They're amateurs," his second-in-command observed. "They've left themselves open to envelopment. Then we'll give them the textbook response," Krianak said. Split formation. Alpha Wing attacks the left flank. Beta Wing attacks the right. We'll crush them from both sides while they're focused on our center. The Haruk fleet divided and began its pincer movement. It was a tactic they had used successfully on dozens of worlds. Attack the weak points, force the enemy to split their attention, then overwhelm them with superior numbers and firepower. The human fleet didn't react the way Krianak expected. As the Haruk ships moved to attack the flanks, the human vessels that had seemed so vulnerably positioned suddenly accelerated. They didn't retreat. They dove straight into the gap between the Haruk's divided forces. "What are they doing?" Krianak demanded. His tactical display showed the answer. The humans were using the Haruk's own formation against him. By splitting his fleet, Krianak had created a gap in his center. The human ships were exploiting it, moving between the two Haruk wings where neither could fire without hitting their own vessels. "Clever," Krianak admitted. "But it won't save them. Reform the fleet." But reforming took time, and the humans weren't giving him any. Their ships wove through the Haruk formation like dancers, each movement precisely calculated. Every time a Haruk vessel tried to lock weapons, the human ship would position itself where the shot would endanger other Haruk vessels. Admiral Chun watched her strategy unfold. Formation Echo 7 was based on tactics from a battle over 2,000 years ago, when Hannibal had deliberately weakened his center to lure the Romans into a trap. The Haruk had fallen for it exactly as her analysts predicted they would. "They fight like the Korthaks," Chun said to her staff. "Aggressive, direct, focused on overwhelming force." Our intelligence was correct. Humanity had spent the last 20 years studying every scrap of information about galactic warfare they could find. They had analyzed battle recordings, studied tactical doctrines, and interviewed Concordat military advisors. They had learned that most alien species fought the same way their ancestors had fought 10,000 years ago. Their tactics hadn't evolved because they hadn't needed to evolve. Humans were different. Humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting only themselves, constantly adapting and innovating because their enemies were just as smart as they were. Every successful tactic bred a counter-tactic. Every strategy spawned a counter-strategy. Human warfare had evolved like a living thing, growing more complex and sophisticated with each generation. The Haruk fleet finally reformed, but they had lost their initial advantage. Krianak growled in frustration. "All ships, concentrated fire on the human command vessel. Ignore the others." Again, the humans surprised him. The moment his fleet focused on the command ship, the other human vessels attacked with coordinated precision. They targeted Haruk engines and communication arrays, not trying to destroy the ships but to disable them. Within minutes, 5 Haruk vessels were dead in space, unable to maneuver or coordinate with the fleet. "They're isolating our ships," Krianak's tactical officer reported, "cutting them off from the fleet and forcing them to surrender or be destroyed." Krianak had never encountered this approach before. Most species either tried to destroy enemy ships completely or fled when outmatched. The humans were doing neither. They were systematically dismantling his fleet's ability to fight as a coordinated unit. "Land the ground forces," he ordered. "We'll crush them on the surface." The Haruk transports descended toward Earth, targeting major cities. Krianak expected panic, chaos, maybe desperate last stands. What he found was something entirely different. The humans had evacuated the cities. When Haruk warriors landed in empty streets, they found themselves in killing zones. Buildings had been rigged with explosives. Streets were blocked with obstacles. Every intersection was covered by hidden firing positions. The Haruk advanced using standard shock troop tactics, moving in tight formations with heavy firepower. Human soldiers hit them with guerrilla tactics, appearing from nowhere, striking hard, then vanishing before the Haruk could respond. When the Haruk tried to pursue, they walked into ambush. One Haruk unit found itself trapped in what humans called a rat trap, inspired by battles fought in ancient cities like Stalingrad and Fallujah. The Haruk warriors were superior fighters individually, but they were fighting in an environment designed to neutralize their advantages. Every room could hide an enemy. Every street could be a trap. Every building could collapse on them. Krianak watched his battle displays with growing horror. His fleet was disabled or scattered. His ground forces were bogged down in endless urban combat. His casualties were mounting, and the humans showed no sign of stopping. "Withdraw to orbit," he finally ordered. "Prepare for strategic retreat." But the humans weren't done. Their ships, which had seemed so weak and primitive, pursued the Haruk vessels as they tried to retreat. They herded the alien ships away from Earth like wolves driving prey, always staying just close enough to threaten, but never committing to a decisive engagement. Admiral Chun watched the Haruk fleet flee. Her officers were celebrating, but she remained calm. "Send them a message," she said. "Tell them humanity offers honorable terms of surrender. They may retrieve their stranded warriors and leave in peace, or they may continue fighting and be destroyed." Krianak received the message and felt something he had never experienced before: respect for an enemy. These humans had beaten him not through superior technology or numbers, but through superior thinking. They had studied his species, predicted his tactics, and countered them perfectly. He accepted their terms. As his fleet prepared to depart, he realized the Concordat's assessment had been catastrophically wrong. Humans weren't weak. They were the most dangerous opponents he had ever faced, and he had only survived because they had chosen to let him live. The galaxy was about to learn the same lesson. The battle recordings spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within weeks, every major power in the Concordat had analyzed the footage of the Haruk defeat. Military academies held emergency sessions. Strategic analysts worked around the clock. Everyone wanted to understand how a Category 7 species had demolished a fleet that should have conquered them easily. High Evaluator Zexthon was summoned before the Concordat Military Council. She stood in the circular chamber, surrounded by holographic projections of the council members, and felt her career crumbling around her. "Your assessment was flawed," Council Leader Dexran stated. The humans demonstrated tactical sophistication far beyond Category 7. They had primitive technology, Zexthon protested. Their weapons were thousands of years outdated. "How could I have known they would fight so effectively?" "That's precisely what we need to understand," another council member said. "We've sent a delegation to Earth. You will accompany them and provide a new assessment. A correct one this time." The Concordat delegation arrived at Earth 3 months after the Haruk defeat. They were met not with hostility, but with surprising hospitality. Admiral Chun herself greeted them at the newly constructed orbital station. "Welcome," she said through the translation device. "We're honored to receive you." Zexthon had expected warriors still flush with victory, perhaps arrogant or threatening. Instead, The humans seemed genuinely pleased to have visitors. They had prepared tours, presentations, and what they called cultural exchanges. The delegation was taken to a place called the United States Military Academy at West Point. Zexton walked through halls lined with portraits of human commanders, display cases showing weapons from different eras, and classrooms where young humans studied tactics and strategy. A human professor named Colonel Martinez gave them a presentation. Warfare has been central to human civilization for our entire recorded history, he explained. We fought wars for territory, resources, religion, ideology, and sometimes just because we didn't understand each other. We fought with stones, with bronze, with iron, with gunpowder, with nuclear weapons. We fought on land, at sea, in the air, and now in space. He showed them a timeline of human warfare. Thousands of years of conflict, from primitive tribal battles to world wars involving millions of soldiers. The aliens in the delegation shifted uncomfortably. Most species had a few wars in their history, conflicts that ended when one side developed superior technology. Humans have been fighting continuously for their entire existence. We've been forced to innovate constantly, Martinez continued. Every generation faced enemies who were just as intelligent as they were. When one side developed a new tactic, the other side had to counter it or be destroyed. This created an evolutionary pressure that doesn't exist when you're only fighting less advanced species. A Vendari war chief named Korath raised a claw. Show us the Battle of Cannae you mentioned. Martinez pulled up a simulation. This battle was fought over 2,000 years ago. Hannibal of Carthage faced a Roman army that outnumbered him significantly. Instead of trying to match their strength, he used their aggression against them. The simulation showed how Hannibal had deliberately weakened his center, letting the Romans push forward while his cavalry destroyed the Roman cavalry on the flanks. Then the Carthaginian forces had encircled the entire Roman army, trapping them and destroying them despite being outnumbered. This is similar to what you did against the Haruk, Korath said slowly. You made your flanks look weak. Asterisk. Yes, Chun said. She had joined the tour. We studied the Haruk's previous conquests and saw they always used the same encirclement tactic. So we prepared a counter based on Cannae and other historical battles. We let them think they were executing their standard strategy. Then we exploited the weaknesses in that strategy. Over the next several days, the delegation was shown more examples. They watched simulations of the Mongol conquests, where mobility and intelligence gathering allowed smaller forces to defeat larger armies. They studied the guerrilla tactics of the Vietnam War, where a technologically inferior force had defeated a superpower through patience and adaptation. They learned about the Blitzkrieg, where speed and coordination created breakthroughs that traditional defenses couldn't stop. A Korthax hive commander named Ziktal watched a presentation on asymmetric warfare and felt something like awe. You have thousands of these strategies, all developed fighting each other? Tens of thousands, Martinez corrected. And that's just counting distinct tactical innovations. If you include variations and combinations, the number is essentially infinite. Every terrain type, every technological level, every political situation has generated its own unique approaches to warfare. Zexton finally understood her mistake. She had evaluated human technology without understanding human thinking. The Korthax had perfected swarming tactics over 10,000 years, and those tactics had never failed them, so they never changed. The Vendari had developed orbital bombardment, and it worked, so they saw no reason to innovate. Every successful species in the galaxy had found a military strategy that worked and stuck with it. Humans couldn't do that. When one human nation developed an unbeatable strategy, another human nation would study it, analyze it, and find a way to counter it. Then someone else would counter the counter. And so on, for thousands of years in an endless cycle of innovation and adaptation. You've been running the galaxy's most intense military academy for your entire history, Zexton said quietly. And your teachers were your enemies. Our teachers were ourselves, Chun replied. We learned from every defeat and every victory. We preserved the lessons in books and academies in the stories we tell our children. War is terrible, but we made sure that if we had to fight, we would learn everything possible from the experience. The Trellic Observer, a massive creature named Gornix, had been silent throughout most of the tour. Finally, it spoke. Your planet is a museum of warfare. Every battle ever fought is a lesson preserved for future generations. Yes, Martinez said. We have a saying. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We've studied our history very carefully. The delegation's final stop was a place called the Imperial War Museum in London. They walked through exhibits showing the evolution of human warfare from ancient times to the present day. They saw armor worn by knights, weapons used in colonial wars, vehicles from the world wars, and modern military technology. One exhibit caught Zexton's attention. It was a simple wall with photographs of soldiers and civilians, with a quote beneath, "War is not about who is right but who is left." We don't love war, Chun said, noticing Zexton's interest. We've seen what it costs, but we understand it better than any species in the galaxy because we've paid the price to learn those lessons. Every strategy you saw today was paid for in blood. Every tactic was refined through trial and error on real battlefields. Every innovation came because someone's life depended on thinking of something new. The delegation returned to the Concordat with a new understanding. Humanity's weakness had been an illusion. Their primitive technology had hidden the fact that they were the galaxy's most sophisticated military thinkers. They had turned warfare into an art form because they'd had no choice. The new assessment was filed. Earth was reclassified as Category Transcendent, Strategic Asset. The primitive species that should have been easy prey had become the galaxy's most valuable military consultants. And they had done it not through superior weapons, but through superior understanding of warfare itself. Word continued to spread. Other species began requesting permission to visit Earth, to study at human military academies, to learn the strategies that had defeated the Haruk. Humanity had been discovered, evaluated, and marked for conquest. Instead, they had marked themselves as the galaxy's new masters of military strategy. And they had only just begun to show the galaxy what human warfare really meant. The crisis arrived 2 years after the Haruk defeat. The Zereth Dominion, an empire that had been expanding for 3,000 years, finally reached the borders of Concordat space. They sent the standard demand, surrender or be destroyed. The Concordat Council convened in emergency session. Every military simulation showed the same result. The Zereth would win. Their technology was superior, their numbers overwhelming, their determination absolute. They had conquered 40 star systems and showed no signs of stopping. Council leader Vexran made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier. Send a request to Earth. We need their help. Admiral Chun received the Concordat's desperate message and immediately understood the situation. The Zereth were doing to the Concordat what the Concordat had expected the Haruk to do to Earth. The difference was that the Zereth were much stronger. We'll help, Chun told the Concordat representatives. But you need to understand something. We can't give you better weapons. We can only teach you to think differently about the weapons you have. Within weeks, human military advisors were scattered across Concordat space. They embedded with fleet commanders, ground force leaders, and strategic planning committees. What they found was both promising and troubling. The Concordat species were individually impressive. The Korthax could swarm enemies with billions of warrior drones. The Vendari could crack planets from orbit. The Trellic could absorb damage that would destroy any human vessel. But they all fought the same way they had fought for thousands of years. "You're predictable," said Commander James Park to a group of Vendari officers. "The Zirith have studied you. They know exactly what you'll do in any situation. That's why they keep winning. Our tactics have never failed us before," one Vendari officer protested. "Because you never fought anyone smart enough to counter them," Park replied. He pulled up a map. "The Zirith know you'll try to establish orbital superiority before engaging ground forces. So they've prepared orbital defense systems to turn your strength into a weakness. You need to do something they don't expect." "Like what?" "Like attacking from the ground up instead of from space down. Like using small, fast ships instead of heavy cruisers. Like making them fight on your terms instead of theirs." Similar conversations were happening across the Concordat. Human advisors taught the Korthax that sometimes a small, precise strike was more effective than a massive swarm. They showed the Trellic that mobility could be more valuable than armor. They demonstrated to every species that there was more than one way to fight. The first test came at the Kelder system. The Zirith fleet arrived expecting the standard Concordat defense. Heavy ships in orbital positions, prepared for a frontal assault. Instead, they found the system seemingly undefended. Zirith War Master Thulvan was immediately suspicious. "Scan for hidden forces." The scans showed nothing. The Kelder system appeared abandoned, except for some civilian infrastructure. Thulvan had fought the Concordat before. This wasn't their style. "It's a trap," his tactical officer said. "Obviously. But what kind?" Thulvan studied his displays. "Deploy advanced scouts. Slow approach. Combat readiness on all vessels." The Zirith fleet moved cautiously into the system. When they reached the inner planets, the trap was sprung. But it wasn't the kind of trap Thulvan expected. Small ships emerged from hiding places among asteroids and debris fields. They weren't trying to fight the Zirith fleet directly. They were targeting supply lines, communication relays, and support vessels. The Zirith found their fleet suddenly cut off from reinforcements and unable to coordinate effectively. "They're isolating us," Thulvan realized. "Just like the humans did to the Haruk. Pull back and reform the fleet." Asterisk, but pulling back meant entering another trap. The Concordat main fleet was waiting at the system's edge, positioned to attack the Zirith as they retreated. The Zirith fleet found itself caught between two forces, neither of which was fighting the way the Concordat had fought before. The Battle of Kelder lasted 3 days and ended with the Zirith in full retreat. They had lost 37 ships, the Concordat only 12. More importantly, the Zirith had lost their aura of invincibility. Thulvan reported to the Zirith High Command. "The Concordat has changed their tactics. They fight like the humans now. Every engagement is different. Every strategy is adapted to counter our strengths. We can no longer predict their movements." The Zirith High Command was unimpressed. "Then we'll simply overwhelm them with force. Assemble the Grand Fleet. We'll crush them with numbers." But the Concordat was learning quickly. Human advisors taught them that a Grand Fleet was just a grand target. When the Zirith Grand Fleet assembled, it found itself harassed by raids on its supply bases. Its communication networks disrupted by cyber attacks, and its commanders uncertain because the Concordat forces seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is the guerrilla warfare the humans taught us," a Korthax commander explained to his officers. "We don't have to defeat the Grand Fleet in direct battle. We just have to make it too expensive for them to maintain it." The Zirith found themselves fighting a war they didn't understand. Every time they adapted to one Concordat strategy, the Concordat would switch to another. Frontal assaults were met with mobile defenses. Encirclements were countered with breakouts. Sieges were answered with relief forces appearing from unexpected directions. A year into the war, Zereth High Command requested negotiations. They had never failed to conquer a target before, but they had never fought an enemy that could think like humans. The peace conference was held on a neutral station. Tholvin represented the Zereth, while Dexran spoke for the Concordat. Admiral Chun was there as an observer. "You've made your point," Tholvin said to Chun. "Your species has changed the nature of galactic warfare. We cannot win this fight, not because you're stronger, but because you're smarter." "We're not smarter," Chun replied. "We just had more practice. We've been fighting wars for 10,000 years, while you've been conquering species that couldn't effectively resist. You optimized for easy victories. We optimized for surviving against enemies who were just as capable as we were." The peace treaty was signed. The Zereth agreed to halt their expansion and open diplomatic relations with the Concordat. In exchange, the Concordat agreed to share some of humanity's military knowledge with the Zereth. Not to make them stronger, but to make them wiser. Zexton stood in the Earth War Memorial Gallery, a museum humanity had built to preserve the lessons of their military history. She walked past exhibits showing weapons from every era, tactical maps from famous battles, and memorials to those who had died in humanity's countless wars. The final exhibit was a simple room with walls covered in text. Quotes from human military philosophers, generals, and strategists. Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, Patton, Eisenhower, and hundreds of others. Their words captured thousands of years of human understanding about warfare. One quote caught her attention. "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Below it, another. "In preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless. But planning is indispensable." And finally, "We study war so that we may have peace." Chun joined her. "Do you understand now why we turned war into an art?" "Because you had to," Zexton said. "Because you were fighting yourselves, and you needed every possible advantage just to survive." "Partly," Chun agreed. "But also because we learned that understanding war deeply was the only way to prevent unnecessary wars. We studied every battle not to glorify violence, but to understand its true cost. We preserved these lessons so future generations would know what warfare really means." The gallery was now open to all species. Military officers from across the galaxy came to study humanity's 10,000 years of accumulated military wisdom. They learned not just tactics and strategies, but the philosophy behind them. They learned that warfare wasn't just about destroying enemies, but about achieving objectives with minimum cost. Earth's classification in the Concordat database had changed one final time. They were no longer listed by category. Instead, their entries simply read, "Humanity Military Strategic Consultants. Approach with respect and an open mind." They have forgotten more about warfare than most species will ever learn. The species once marked as weak had become the galaxy's teachers. Not through conquest, but through the patient accumulation of knowledge paid for in blood over millennia. They had turned war into art because they understood it better than anyone else in the galaxy. And they had only one condition for sharing that knowledge, that it be used wisely, with full understanding of war's true cost. Because humanity knew better than anyone that the greatest victory was the battle you never had to fight.